Great. And then Radhika, if you can just keep your eye on the waiting room and let people in as they come into the Zoom meeting, we'll kick off. Great. Well, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. My name is Carlos Martinez. I am an editor of Friends of Socialist China, and I'm one of the organizers of the delegation that we're reporting back on. So I don't really want to take up a lot of your time, and I'd rather give more time to the other speakers. I'd just like to say a few quick words on behalf of Friends of Socialist China, because it was such a huge honor for us to plan and to organize and to run this delegation. It was our first delegation. Running delegations isn't necessarily what Friends of Socialist China was set up for, and it's not necessarily what we envisaged when we first established Friends of Socialist China as a website and as a social media presence and as an event platform just over 3 years ago.
Hello, I am Andrew Tate, and you are a fucking nigger.
Okay, let's report that person.
Clearly, they're displaying their intelligence.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry for that interruption. But anyway, yes, going back to the meeting, I think it says a lot that we've kind of been sufficiently consistent and we've done sufficiently good work that a prominent NGO like the China Network for International Exchanges would have that level of confidence in us, and that we could pull off a delegation of this sort with 14 delegates from Britain, from Ireland, from the US, a very diverse group in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, all on a really high political level, all very keen to study and to learn more about people's China. So huge thanks to CNIE for their work in organizing all the practical details of the delegation, for hosting us, for translating and interpreting, for taking incredibly good care of us, for arranging wonderful field trips, wonderful meetings with organizations, with universities, with officials that I'm sure you'll be hearing much more about in the next hour or two. Yeah, it was, to say the least, an extremely memorable trip, an extremely memorable 10 days. I think we'll all treasure the experience. It's, I think it was a great joy in particular to go to a thriving, optimistic China at a time of what feels like deep decline in the West, a time when our political representatives are pursuing austerity, they're pursuing neoliberalism, and they're pursuing imperialist aggression, not to mention, of course, support for genocide in Gaza. So for Friends of Socialist China, it was just a real privilege to be involved in putting together a delegation of this nature. In the case of around half the delegates, they were visiting China for the first time, and I'm sure the trip has contributed to their political and their internationalist education in that sense. And more generally, I really hope the trip has played some small part in terms of developing people-to-people relations between China and the West, in terms of building greater understanding of China, building greater understanding of Chinese socialism, and contributing to a movement against this escalating new Cold War, against this escalating campaign of China encirclement and China containment. And we're talking about a time when in both Britain and the US, elections are coming up in which both the main parties are desperate to prove how anti-China they are, when what they should be doing and what China has put on the table is cooperating with China on preventing climate breakdown, on regulating artificial intelligence, on accelerating development in the global South, on preventing future pandemics, on preventing nuclear proliferation, and on developing a fairer, more equal, more peaceful model of international relations. And one last quick comment before we get started properly is that I think probably this delegation is quite historic in the sense that, as far as I know at least, it's the first delegation of its kind for many, many years, and probably decades even, in the sense of being a solidarity delegation, a delegation focused on China's socialism specifically. And I certainly hope that there'll be many more such delegations in the years to come. So with that out of the way, I will introduce the platform. Our first speaker is going to be Danny Haiphong. Danny is actually on holiday at the moment, so he's submitted a pre-recorded video which we're going to share. Danny, I think, probably needs not much introduction, but he's a contributing editor.
Oh, that's racist.
Who is doing that? Paul and Radhika.
Kevin G.
Please be alert to let's report Kevin G. Yes, Danny, yeah, I'm sure doesn't need much introduction for most of the people on this call. He's a contributing editor to Black Agenda Report, a co-founder of Friends of Socialist China, very popular political analyst and broadcaster with, I think, currently around 230,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel. So let me share his video.
Hi, everyone. This is Danny Haiphong, as I'm sure I was introduced. I run a YouTube show on geopolitics, especially relating to China and Russia developments and the changing multipolar world order. I've been a writer, continue to write for places like Beijing Review and CGTN, Global Times, etc. And I helped co-found Friends of Socialist China, which was hosting this delegation, and I have to give a big shout out to Carlos Martinez and Keith Bennett for their arduous work in putting this together, as well as the CNIE, the China NGO for International Exchanges, all of the staff, especially Ma Jingjing and Lu Ning, who made the trip so seamless and not just incredibly enjoyable, but also very informative and instructive for the work that we have ahead of us. So I want to talk about the implications of this trip. I'm sure many who are participating in this event, who are speaking here, will talk about the experiences they had in places like Siping and Changchun and the larger Zhejiang province that we attended or that we traveled to, as well as places like Jiaxing and Hangzhou, the wealthiest city in all of China. We also were in Beijing. So we got to travel to so many places. We were in Jilin province, which borders the DPRK and is a hub for development, especially in relation to high-speed rail and new energy development. Very inspiring. We spoke to provincial officials in the Communist Party of China. We went to party schools to learn about not just party life, but what do party members learn? How do they understand China's development process? We focused a lot on modernization, how China is spearheading modernization in a completely different way under socialist principles and diktats, which have the people's interests and livelihoods at the center. But I wanted to talk more about the implications of people-to-people exchanges, which China has made a national priority at this time. And why is it a national priority? Well, there is a profound misunderstanding and, dare I say, xenophobia, a growing antipathy toward China in the collective West, in the United States as the hegemon and epicenter of the collective West, that is a cancer upon all that humanity has to offer, to look forward to, and to enjoy in this present moment. Socialism is, of course, the highest priority, not just of China, but I believe for all of humanity. However, even just the prospects of peace, of existence, are now under threat because of the behavior, the policies, and actions of the U.S. empire. Just take a look at how the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, this rabid and heinous command structure that threatens war with China, how it has behaved even in recent days, talking about creating an unmanned hellscape for China in a war over Taiwan. This is literally how they are talking about Taiwan and China. Look at NATO's escalations with Russia. Look at how the U.S. is militarily encircling China. Look at how Europe is about to shoot itself and all of the rest of its toes by imposing tariffs on China's electric vehicle industry, following its master, the United States, in imposing such reckless economic measures. Look at the sanctions. Look at the misery that the global majority has to endure because of the Western way of life, because of Western imperialism. All of this is a threat to our very existence, our livelihoods, and our interests. And China is a shining example of what it means to break from this, and not just to break from this, but to build the very architecture from which everyone can break from it. And that is what people-to-people exchanges can help us learn, can help imbue into the minds and hearts of people in the collective West who are being misled, who are being manipulated, who are being drawn into a war that will not benefit them, or it will simply benefit the very few at the top of the imperialist hierarchy. We have to talk about, when we talk about people-to-people exchanges, we have to talk about solidarity and what solidarity really means. It means to view yourself as an equal to those you are in solidarity with, and it means that you come together around a common project in defense of one another. China has held up its bargain. China has put forward a model of peaceful relations, of win-win cooperation, peaceful development, and a complete policy, foreign policy of non-interference. China does not wage wars. When you go to China, war is not in the vocabulary. There is no appetite for war. There's a big appetite for defending sovereignty, but there's no appetite for war. No one, when you go to China, will talk about sanctions. No one will talk about economic war, any kind of war. The big reality that hits you very hard when you go to China is the fact that people are confident, people are hopeful in the future, and people are living their lives for not just themselves, but for the betterment of all of China. And now, in a really huge and very important position of also showing by example what prospects can be looked forward to for the rest of the world. So people-to-people exchanges hold the cards, hold the ability to teach us all what it means to be in solidarity with each other. That's why I love to go on people-to-people exchanges. It's why I attend these delegations. It's because not only do I get to learn more about how Chinese people, how the Communist Party of China is moving the world forward in a very progressive way, but I also get to come back and talk about this and educate others so that they can become part of this process, so that we can all become part of the multipolar process.
Andrew Tate, you are a fucking
can begin to learn what it would mean to talk about and implement a kind of socialism within our own context. China is socialism with Chinese characteristics. What will it be for the United States? What will it be for the collective West? That is the answer. That is the question that has not yet been answered. But surely, when we travel to China, we can see the modern development. We can see the infrastructure that is built that benefits everybody. We can see the higher standard of living that if you were to go to China 10, 20, 30 years ago, you would not be able to see the same China. You would see a more polluted China, a more impoverished China. This is what progress really looks like in a collective sense. And so when you go to China, you see how the U.S. empire has already been defeated. The U.S. empire cannot sanction China. You go to China, no one is, as I said, going to talk about sanctions. Why? They don't feel them. Why don't they feel the sanctions? Well, because China has the people at heart, and China will always restructure and reorient its economy so that the people's interests come first. On a prior trip to China, I was told that yes, Huawei was hit hard by sanctions and it affected the ability to release 5G phones. Well, I go back to China now and there are 5G phones sold by Huawei everywhere, including the Huawei Mate Pro 60, which just blew the brains out of people like Gina Raimondo. So this is the reality that we live in today. It is a hopeful reality on the one hand when we exchange with China and build solidarity and see what a new world can look like. But on the other hand, we come back to the United States and the collective West, and we see the misery, the poverty, the repression, the collapse, the utter collapse of the political, economic, and military order led by the US. And that is the one that we ultimately have to focus on. But we are very lucky and thankful to have an example like China to show us that a new world is indeed possible, that we do not have to languish in the same state, that politics, development, it is not linear, it is always in motion, that this is not always how it has to be. The Chinese people once lived under semi-feudal and semi-colonial squalor. They once were humiliated for over a century. Now they stand tall. Now they have built a new China. Now that new China is becoming not just a shining example of what a country can do, but also a leader in a new development in the world that will take us to the goal that I think all of us have here, which is world peace in our lifetime. That is what China's model for multipolarity and foreign policy and relations across the world holds for all of us. And it is up to us to continue to strengthen people-to-people exchanges like these so that more and more people can see it. More and more people in especially our political circles, those on the left mainly, who continue to ignore China or demonize China, they do not know the real China. Only when you go can you know the real China. Only when you can see the blue skies in Beijing when they once were smog riddled just a decade plus ago. When you see the tens of thousands of high-speed rail built when just 16 years ago there was not one in China. When you see this rapid development, when you see this progress, you cannot help but wonder what in the world is happening where we reside. Why is there such a stark difference? That question leads to the answer of why the United States is aggressive toward China, why there is this ever-escalating war toward China. So I have, of course, spoken, I usually don't, but I have spoken longer than the time allotted to me. But I just want to say to everyone who was on the delegation that it was a wonderful experience being with all of you. I want to say once again, it is my thanks and appreciation to the International Manifesto Group and Friends of Socialist China for putting on this event, to the China NGO Network for International Exchanges for hosting such an incredible delegation. And I look forward to many more trips to China to come, because our mission is going to be a protracted one. Our struggle is going to be a protracted one. In order to achieve true peace, in order to achieve true multipolarity, those of us sitting inside of the unipolar imperial albatross, this diseased and cancer-ridden world order that has caused so much devastation to the global majority. It is we who are sitting here that are ultimately responsible to close its casket once and for all. Once again, many thanks, and I hope to see everyone who was on the delegation with me, as well as some of you who are listening at some point in the near future.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Danny. And just sorry to everyone in relation to the racist trolls who've been attempting to sabotage this event. People are clearly desperate to suppress the voices of anti-war activists, of anti-imperialist activists, of people who stand for solidarity, which is pretty sad. But there you go, and a lesson for the organizers of this webinar. And we'll make sure that future events are secure from these kind of idiots. So the next speaker I'm very pleased to introduce is Fiona Sim. Fiona is an organizer, political activist, campaigner, and analyst based in Britain, a former prominent student activist with Goldsmiths University, a co-founder of the Black Liberation Alliance, and a member of the Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee. Fiona, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Carlos. And Keith, again, echoing Danny's words, thanks you so much for the coordination of the delegation. It was an absolute privilege and delight to be invited and to be able to come to China. I don't know if any of them are watching, but I would also like to thank our Chinese hosts and comrades who accommodated us so well and so amazingly during the course of our trip there. I couldn't have imagined sort of a smoother and more efficient trip. And I think in that sort of spirit in itself was what I saw very much elevated in China. It's that hospitality, it's that efficiency, it's that just the sheer power of human beings having people to people exchanges and working together in a world that is rife with just so much despair and destruction. Coming back to China for the first time since 2019, so pre-pandemic times, it really was a balm to my soul, especially coming from Britain at the time, where it was just a pit of despair for everyone involved, for workers, for people witnessing the genocide in Gaza, and just the general state of affairs and lack of faith in our politicians, our government, I guess. And so going to China, it was a timely reminder for me, and I think for most people in the delegation, that the future of the world, the future of humanity, does lie within the global south. A society that I myself have become acclimated to in living in the imperial core is simply not a fair or accurate representation of what the world can be or what the world has to be. In fact, on my very first day in the country, when we were in Beijing, we visited the 12345 call center. I know this was a very popular destination for a lot of us in the delegation because of just how incredible it was. And I was personally just blown away by the efficiency. So the 12345 call center is, well, as the name suggests, it is a call center, and they take calls from citizens all around Beijing, so from all around the different districts. And at the time we were visiting, it was, I made a note of this because I just thought it was incredible. At 9:51 a.m., they had already taken 12,072 calls from citizens across Beijing. And this is in scope of them taking up to 65,000 calls a day. So within that morning alone, according to the data, they'd already found like 2,000 resolutions for some of the problems that had been raised, another 4,000 referrals, and there was I think it was like a 7-day turnaround for resolutions. So even for people who can't get a resolution straight away, they have like a 7-day time limit of when they're meant to turn around and get you referred to a specific political bureau or department to sort out whatever problem they had. So these problems, it wasn't necessarily just, it wasn't like emergency line. It was a line for everyday problems. So, if a community was suffering because their water had been cut off or there was no gas, or, someone was finding that there was a really noisy neighbor that they didn't know what to do anything about, or they just needed a bit of help getting around the city or getting access to services they weren't sure were available. They would call into the service, and this would all be noted as part of a very centralized system. And things such as, it was used technology, big technology, I guess, was used to serve the people. And I just found that such a stark contrast to how technology and AI and things can be seen, particularly in the West, because we all know that they are used to subjugate the worker and used to, facilitate things like mass unemployment and surveillance culture and things like that. So to see how it was utilized in China to serve the people, to ensure projects such as, getting a shelter for the elderly to be able to come and commune together, to come and have meals together, to kickstart projects where, the local people would be able to have a better say in their governments based on the feedback that they gave to 12345 Center. It was just absolutely mind-blowing. And again, it's a spirit that you see throughout China. I thought before coming to China that my understanding of Xi Jinping thought was fairly robust. But what I didn't realize was the sheer mass support that the philosophy has throughout all of the peoples, from sort of the grassroots to the officials to the students in academia. Xi Jinping thought is taken so incredibly seriously and is deeply embedded in Chinese politics and how the country is governed. It's based on, for those of you who don't know, it is essentially a philosophy based on fairness and justice, on joint consultation, on the end of sort of class conflict and the abundance and transcendence of international theory. that last line I took from an academic who spoke, and he was speaking on the commitment of internationalism and how important that was to socialism with Chinese characteristics, and how Xi Jinping thought was a crucial and essential part of achieving that within China. It is based on a people-centered logic, seeking to remove the expansionist nature, and off the back of seeing that Western modernization simply did not work and will not work for a country like China. And I just found it, again, so incredibly fascinating to see how a philosophy, the study of Xi Jinping thought was really embedded into the practice of how China was governed, how China was run. And it was in every, I think in every arena of life that we managed to visit and learn about, we saw how the core tenets of Xi Jinping thought were essentially ingrained into the very fabric of the organization and the sort of mass line and the people-to-people approach that was being taken, not just on a local provincial level, but on international level as well. There was a real dedication to ensuring that there was a sort of win-win cooperation, as we always hear in the media. But it's true, it truly is based on a win-win level of cooperation. And we were just so lucky to be able to visit provinces like Zhejiang and Jilin, where we learned even more about how that was embedded on a community level. We saw how there were community centers that I find just amazing and unthought of here, where, you know, there's floors dedicated to health and well-being. There's floors dedicated to, you know, calligraphy for the elderly and hobbies for the retired, that there was like gym facilities, kitchen facilities, a whole floor dedicated to children with children's rooms, and where they would take suggestions from children using the centers on how they could improve and how they could be more friendly and accommodating to the local community's children. And so it was just amazing, really, to see how this is on a practical level, how this improves the lives of the everyday people in following the philosophy of Xi Jinping thought and, of course, socialism with Chinese characteristics. And, you know, it had the effect of helping me to reflect on a lot of things about this country, essentially, about the imperial core and where we live in the West. And that's just the amount of nihilism we experience. And where in the West, I feel there is a lot of nihilism in things like climate change, that there is a despair that we will never recover from the horrific trajectory towards a mass extinction event that seems to be that, you know, we are 30 seconds to midnight on the doomsday clock. Where there is that nihilism, I see in China something in complete contrast. I see Chinese scientists working day and night exploring the possibilities of nuclear fusion and artificial sun, where civil servants lead the charge against deforestation, and the world's largest solar power plant literally went online just last week in China. In the West, we are in election season. We are seeing that election season is giving rise to the worst in humanity, I would argue, where politicians are fighting over the scraps they think they can give to people, that they're promising to give to people, but may never see the light of day. And where there is that skepticism of, you know, having a government that isn't a corrupt government, that isn't completely overshadowed by power, by billionaires in our cabinet, I see the coordination of millions of Chinese officials and millions more party members in building a shared vision of socialism with Chinese characteristics that begins in the grassroots. And of course, where we see there is such a culture of discontent that the UK is just America's lapdog, especially in the events of Palestine. In China, I see a pride in a country that puts its sovereignty first, whilst acknowledging that it cannot solve its problems by itself. I recall another PhD student we met speaking so passionately about how there is genocide and torture happening in all corners of the world. But because of that, it's only so much more important that China is contributing to a better world through its leadership, whether it's peace talks and partnerships with the Global South, or projects such as the Belt and Roads, encouraging countries to break away from the yokes of imperialism and unipolarity. I just want to, I guess, end by emphasizing that this was obviously just a very whistle-stop tour of my experience in China. But the one resounding thing I take away is that China is still a developing country. It is a country governing 1.4 billion people. It has millions of party members striving to make it the best possible country it can be within the context of the Cold War in China, within the context of global imperialism and Western hegemony. And China, for all that is doing good, it also does not need to be the model of perfection for us in the imperial core or in the diaspora to be able to support its endeavors for a better world. China only needs to continue following the path it is currently on and the path that has been shown to be successful, because it is creating a better world at the end of the day. It is undeniable. And it's doing so for its people hand in hand with the progressive and anti-imperialist governments and leaderships in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Vietnam, Burkina Faso, Senegal. And all we can do from the imperial core truly is watch and learn, which is why I feel it was so important for this delegation to have happened. And I feel so blessed to have been part of it and to see firsthand. And I encourage everyone who has not been to China, who still has these misconceptions about China and the way that it's governed, to go and see for yourself. Go on holiday there, go and visit any province, and you will see just how far it has come in the past 2 decades alone. And here in the West, the lesson we must take is that we must strive to mobilize even a fraction of the revolutionary power we see in the peoples of China. And no matter how impossible it must seem, we must maintain the spirit of revolutionary optimism, and we must strive to create a society that meets even a fraction of the one that is evoked in China and across the global South. That is the only way forward. And that's the end of my contribution. Thank you so much again to Friends of Socialist China for platforming me, and I really look forward to reading your comments and questions and hearing from my fellow delegates. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fiona. That was really great and very inspiring and moving. Yeah, it's interesting. Our first field visit, which Fiona described, was to this 12345 service hotline headquarters in Beijing, and I think everyone was really impacted and more or less blown away by it, because apart from anything else, the picture that's painted in the West of China is of a sort of dystopian, authoritarian hellscape, and it's just fascinating to see how different the reality is, and to see that contrast. To see how the government is how much more democratic it is than our governments, and how it is very much kind of by the people and for the people, and is so attentive to people's needs, to understanding problems and to resolving problems. So the next speaker is Roger McKenzie. Again, I don't think Roger needs too much introduction to most of the people on this call. Roger is international editor of the Morning Star, which is the only socialist daily newspaper in the English-speaking world. He is a long-standing senior trade unionist and a campaigner for workers' rights and against racial discrimination. He's the former Assistant General Secretary of Unison and a current committee member of Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee. So please go ahead, Roger.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words. I will try and speak as clearly as I possibly can, because I really do want to get over a few points without duplicating what other comrades have said. But I do want to say, apart from giving my thanks to the folks who arranged our visit, I'm not going to ignore what happened in this meeting so far, where people have tried to stifle debates. People have tried to stop people from telling of their experiences. And there's many of us on this call who have had this experience all our lives. And frankly, I'm prepared to take that on with anybody who doesn't want to hear about the experience of people of the global South, of which I count China, who are standing up and trying to build a better world. Now, if they don't want to hear that, get off the call and let the people who want to build a better world get on with trying to build a better world. Because if you're not interested in hearing about a country that has removed around 900 million people from poverty, get off the call, because these are the people who are really interested in making sure that they have a better life. I grew up in a world where I watched the news and was watching the news talking about starvation in China, mass poverty in China. And, this was something that we were living with. It is astonishing progress, as somebody's just put in the chat. It's astonishing. It's actually unprecedented in this world. And I think we should be praising that. And for those people who want to interrupt this call and interrupt those of us who are trying to make a difference, ask yourselves this, right? Are the countries that you presumably are supporting, are they got any interest in removing the people who are living on the streets of Britain, who are living on the streets of the United States? Before you answer that, I'll answer it for you. The answer's no, they're not. I was in the United States recently as well, and I was staying just off Georgetown, and just at the top of my road was Pennsylvania Avenue. And some of you will know that Pennsylvania, at one end of Pennsylvania Avenue is the White House. Next door to them, a couple of doors away, is the IMF. Couple of doors away from them is the World Bank. At the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, I'll tell you what I found. I found people living in tents on waste ground. And that is the United States. I went across the United States and I saw devastated urban decay taking place. I saw none of that in China. I tell you what I saw in China. I saw optimism. I saw confidence. I saw people wanting to make a real difference, people who were proud of their country and who were interested in debates, actually, because we need to knock aside this this thing that I certainly learned about in China, where people say, well, it's Chinese Communist Party and there's only one view. Actually, there's not. There's a robust debate that takes place in China, and I welcome that. I thought it was really interesting that people were having those debates. I welcome China as part of the global majority. And I think it's really important that we make the contrast with what we're seeing elsewhere. Over these last few days, we saw the G7 meeting taking place in Italy, where everybody was running around thinking that it's okay to shake hands with a fascist who runs that country as the prime minister. Everyone's running around, couldn't wait to have a photo taken next to this person while they sit around a table and try and carve up the world. You will never see China sitting around a table talking about or planning to carve up the world. Actually, what you see is China working with the rest of the global south, working with people to try and build that better world, to try and make sure that people can have a better life, because they understand in China. One of the great lessons that I got from my visit was that their interests are very much dependent on everybody else's interest in the global south. And I think that that is a really important starting point, not the starting point that the United States has, for example, which basically said, you can only have the friends that we have. You can only do the things that we do. You can only trade with the people that we say you can trade with. And if you fail to do any of those things, we're going to sanction you, and we're going to even consider military action against you. So, you know, what sort of world do people want? Do you want a world where people are cooperating with each other, not at the point of a gun or not at the threat of sanctions, but actually talking seriously about building that proper world? Or do you want to continue to support a country that really is hurtling towards trying to throw us into World War III? And I think that we need to contrast what we saw at the G7, £60 billion to Ukraine, $60 billion to Ukraine, being agreed by these countries, every one of which there's people struggling to put bread on the table in those countries and struggling to keep a roof over their heads. And yet they think that that's okay to put $60 billion on the table for a country that is, frankly, losing that conflict anyway. You know, they need to think really seriously about what this new world is. And I want to move away from the words of multipolar, because one of the things that I learned, again, in China was that that's not something that they're particularly interested in. They're interested in a world of cooperation. They're interested in multilateral world. They're interested in a multilateral world where people are cooperating with each other, where there's not a world leader, where somebody thinks because they're elected that they can, in a particular country, that they can pass themselves off as being the leader of the free world, apparently. You know, when it needs Georgia Maloney to try and point them in the right direction at a photo opportunity. You know, we need to get serious about making sure that we go out and argue the case for the global south and include China within that case for the global south. And we shouldn't be afraid of going out and doing that. These people who think that it's okay to come and interrupt and proper debate and throw around the N-word and to throw around insults at people need to be confronted for what they are. They are racists. And they are interrupting our meeting, and they are people who want to maintain, it's not even the status quo. They want to maintain a position where the global south acts as an extracting point for them so that they continue to get rich and the rest of the world continues to get poorer. That's what I thought I knew before I went to China, but I'll tell you what I learned in China was that I learned more of that is necessary. I learned more of us going out and having these arguments with these ignorant people who think that it's all right to come on these meetings and interrupt people trying to make a better world. I think we have to confront these individuals wherever they are. But most of all, I think we should be really proud of our support for China. I think we should go out and be evangelical, actually, about our support for China and our support for the global south, because we're on the side of right. And in years to come, it will be proven that the sort of things that we're campaigning for, the sort of arguments that we're making about that better world will be proven to be right. And these people who want to live in the past, like they're sitting around the table and carving up a world and throwing out their racist insults, these are the people of yesterday, and long may they be the people of yesterday. We've got a world to win. Thanks very much for listening.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Roger. And in terms of these racist trolls that are trying to sabotage our meeting, you know, incredibly well put and 100% agree. And, you know, the contrast you made between the US and China and visiting both places this year, that really resonated with me, because I remember in 2019, I went to both Beijing and New York City for the first time, obviously both major kind of world-class cities. But yet the contrast between them couldn't be more stark in terms of like homelessness and extreme poverty and cleanliness and level of care and maintenance and whatnot. You know, I mean, New York City, you can't move for more than 5 meters without seeing someone begging, without someone in desperate, dire straits of poverty, whereas one simply does not see that in China these days. The level of infrastructure, of course, is a huge contrast. New York's infrastructure is absolutely crumbling, whereas China has, you know, the best physical infrastructure in the world. And, you know, we're talking about a developing country. We're talking about a country that until maybe 3 generations ago was literally one of the poorest countries in the world. So what China's achieved in terms of alleviating poverty and improving people's living standards and of development and emergence as a country is really nothing short of extraordinary. So our next speaker is Margaret Kimberley, if Margaret is still with us. Margaret is the editor of Black Agenda Report. She's the host of the Black Agenda Report radio podcast. She's an activist and campaigner with Black Alliance for Peace, and she's author of the excellent Prejudential Black America and the Presidents. And I believe this delegation that we just went on was her first time visiting China. So please go ahead, Margaret. Oh, Margaret.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I can't turn on my
Margaret,
video.
sorry, let me just please take care of that. I'll just be a second.
Okay. Thank you.
Where is that? Okay. I'm just going to make you co-host, and then you can do whatever you like.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I won't be trolling, though. You can trust me with the co-host responsibilities. Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, everyone. Radhika, Carlos, everyone who has brought us together, and Friends of Socialist China for that amazing experience that I had. And yes, my first visit to China. So greetings, everyone, and good day, whatever time it is where you are. I'm Margaret Kimberley. I'm executive editor of Black Agenda Report. And as well, I have leadership roles in the Black Alliance for Peace and the United National Anti-War Coalition. But lately, my proudest affiliation is having joined the Friends of Socialist China in its first ever delegation to Beijing, Zhejiang, and Jilin. Our hosts from the China NGO Network for International Exchanges provided our group with a whirlwind of lectures, bilateral discussions, and visits to museums and historic sites. I had a sort of epiphany that I've often had when traveling to nations that we are told we're not supposed to like. I think of myself as being well informed, but whenever I travel abroad, and particularly to socialist countries, I'm reminded how deprived I and most people from the United States are, even if we strive to broaden our knowledge. We're deprived of historical information, and we're propagandized to hate or fear nations which the ruling class labels as adversaries. For example, we're being warned that China is buying up US farmland. Never mind that a variety of Chinese interests own fewer than 1,400 acres in a country with 1.3 billion acres of agricultural land. The total amount of US agricultural land owned by Chinese interests is less than 0.03%. Despite that fact, there are congressional and state laws in place banning or limiting something that isn't even happening, all because of what can only be called war propaganda. It is in that light that travel to China and study of China is so important. Even if I had ever believed those lies, I would now know that China is self-sufficient in food production. I've seen the extensive farmland with my own eyes. How else could it be in a country with a population of more than 1 billion people, comprising 18% of the world's population? That easily provable fact is one that's never mentioned in the plethora of nonsensical so-called news that we're fed in this nation. When US policy is said to represent the world, the nation with more people than any other is left out of the equation. Why, we have to ask, why is there so much animus against China in the United States? I think racism, as we've seen in the people attempting to troll this meeting, I think racism explains some of that, as the US is driven by notions of white supremacy in so much that it does, as does the US insistence on having what it calls primacy, being in control around the world politically, economically, and militarily. That illusion of control is quite dangerous and can't allow for the free flow of information that it claims to respect. In the case of China, not only do we see a nation outside of the US sphere of influence, but one that excels in so many ways precisely because it is socialist. In a session, one of our sessions led by Chen Lizhu on common features of Chinese modernization and Chinese characteristics, we were told that these were the defining features of Chinese modernization. Modernization of a huge population, common prosperity, material and cultural, ethical advancement, harmony between humanity and nature, and modernization of peaceful development. We were also told that the CPC is a party that keeps its mission and the interests of the people firmly in mind. It's in sharp contrast with some parties who only focus on the result of elections and their own benefits under the multi-party constitutional democracy system, unquote. Common prosperity, that's a foreign concept in the US political system, which openly caters to capitalist interests. Development is the result of whatever the ruling class wants for itself. Any mention of people's needs are a low priority if they are made at all. We see this plainly in this presidential election year, in which neither of the major duopoly parties mentions the people's needs as part of their platforms. With less than 5 months before Election Day, President Biden is trotting out small reforms, which will be helpful to many people, but which clearly could have been done earlier in his term. They haven't been done because the people's needs are simply not part of the political agenda. The people's needs are, in fact, antithetical to the political agenda. Modernization is whatever benefits capitalists, and if any benefit accrues to the people, it is totally by accident. Of course, the major root of US animus towards China is socialism. Socialism which it cannot defeat because socialism was won by struggle. In Jilin, we visited a hero city, Siping, given that title because of the pivotal role it played in 1946 and 1947. Here in the United States, we will soon celebrate what is called Independence Day, a victory of settler colonists bent on expansion, enslavement, and destruction of indigenous peoples. The victory of the People's Republic of China cannot be defeated by the usual means, and that anger and, frankly, jealousy is obvious in US foreign policy and hostility to China. Here, we're constantly told that socialism is a failure and that it doesn't work. Revolutions subjugated by a variety of US subversions are held up as examples of failure, while the great success of China is omitted or delegitimized in some way. I saw a society that works quite well. I didn't see people living on the street as I do here in New York or other major cities. I did see a public park where people gathered to entertain one another that was built to serve senior citizens and what I called a playground for older people. I've never seen such an effort to meet the needs of the elderly in such a simple way here in this country. I live in a country which says that there is no other world possible, that immiseration through debt peonage and low wages and mass incarceration is the best of all possible worlds, and that we should have no expectation of having a different reality. We are told that having a Congress that is a money laundering operation for the ruling class is the best we can expect. Not only did we see amazing infrastructure and beautiful airports and roadways, but we also learned about the cultural history of the People's Republic of China through its film industry, something we aren't even told exists. I felt the need to remind myself of what was happening in the US during our trip to China. There was bipartisan support for a giveaway of $91 billion for the military-industrial complex, including $8 billion to antagonize China through support of Taiwan, a Chinese province. It was surreal watching the Washington clown show from China, while members of Congress stupidly referred to conservative post-Soviet leader Vladimir Putin as a communist KGB thug and a murderous Marxist dictator. China was counseling peace. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met with Xi Jinping, who repeated that peace talks are the only reasonable solution to the Ukraine crisis. China has offered its services in an effort to end the bloodshed ever since the proxy war began, but it's been rebuffed at every turn. Nations like Germany are firmly under Washington's grip and dare not act as the independent nations they claim to be. China welcomes world leaders without expecting obedience or collaboration in war crimes, but that is simply unacceptable to the US, which demands hegemony at every turn. But hegemony is impossible. China cannot be defeated. It did not strive to create a prosperous society just to allow it to be destroyed by a nation in the midst of a dangerous decline. So yes, there is a new world possible, and it lies outside of the collective West. China is a shining example to people of the world. It is one that, of course, is not without its complications or its contradictions, but it stands apart clearly in providing for people what the nations that are so antagonistic towards it claim to have but fail to do. So I'll just end by thanking the Friends of Socialist China for the amazing opportunity that I was afforded and for putting together this meeting. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Margaret. That's absolutely wonderful and very touching. And really important what you said in relation to propaganda, because the West, the US and its allies really are waging a propaganda war against China at the moment and have been for several years. That it's a bad actor, that they're flying spy balloons over Montana and whatnot, that there's even a ridiculous story that's come up in the last couple of days in Britain that the delivery of new patches for soldiers' hats have been delayed on the basis that they're manufactured in China, and there may be some possibility of them being used for spying purposes. There are obviously these disgusting and nasty slanders about human rights in Xinjiang, that China's engaged in genocide or cultural genocide. Then beyond that, there's the economic side of things. They're taking our jobs, they're stealing our technology, that China's, an aggressive force in the South China Sea, that China's gearing up for war in relation to Taiwan. And, this propaganda war, as I often say, is war propaganda. They're trying to get us on board. They're trying to get the public on board with their new Cold War, with their campaign of encirclement and their containment, with their trade war, and potentially for a hot war. To do anything to prevent China's rise, to do anything to prevent the collapse of US hegemony and the emergence of a new multilateral, multipolar, more fair, more democratic, more just world. They don't, when it comes to China, they don't talk about poverty alleviation. They don't talk about China's emergence as the first green energy superpower. They don't talk about China's consistent commitment to peace, its constitutional commitment to peace. They want to win our support for their aggression, and we mustn't give them that support, and we must expose their lies, we must expose their slanders. So the next speaker is Russel Harland, and hopefully Russ has been able to turn his video on. If not, Radhika, could you please make him a co-host of the meeting so that he can
I'll do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Russel is a trade union organizer. He's Deputy Branch Secretary and International Relations Officer for Surrey County Unison. He's also a member of the Friends of Socialist China Britain Committee. So go ahead, Russel.
Thanks, Carlos. I'm just trying to work out how I get my...
Yeah, I'll just take care of that. Give me a second, Russell.
All right. No problem. While you're doing that...
there you go. Now you can turn on your video.
Okay, thank you. Just don't eat into my time just yet. I'm going to do a truncated part of the article that I wrote. If anyone's got 20 minutes to spare at the end of this, sometime they can maybe read the whole thing, which I put in the chat. But I'm not going to go through it all because obviously it's too long. I'm also not going to go through the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hotline because my dear comrade Fiona has eloquently already detailed that, as has Carlos. And so I'll skip that part. So I'm gonna jump straight in. Our census took a roller coaster ride of information gathering during our whistle-stop tour of different sites of importance throughout our 10-day delegation. At the Peking University in Red Building, we were given a guided tour and presentation at the site of the CPC's early activities in the premises that fomented the revolutionary cause in China. We jostled for space with members of the public, beaming with pride at the contribution their ancestors made to the building of the People's Republic of China. The walls were adorned with artifacts, pictures, and detailed descriptions of what took place in the building. A particularly enjoyable aspect of the trip was being around the universities and the CPC cadre academies. One of the first roundtable discussions that took place when we visited the School of CPC and Party Building at Renmin University. It was during these dialogues that Zhu Luning, our translator, established a fan club among the delegation, with her sharp intelligence and skillful application of her job. Equally, CNIE Program Manager Ma Jingjing quickly exercised her composed leadership as our interlocutor during these interactions. The discussions themselves were formally respectful, with protocol to uphold on each side. Our delegation leader, Keith Bennett, demonstrated his masterful knowledge of Chinese history, culture, and Marxism, setting the exchanges off on the right tone. Equally, co-editor of Friends of Socialist China, Carlos Martinez, was on hand to support Keith with formalities and introductions. The dialogues were fascinating and absorbing. At various times, the rooms almost shook with enthusiasm from both sides. So keen were people to contribute and engage. This was especially evident at Jilin University, Changchun, where we sat adjacent a packed hall full of students and teaching staff, all keen to counteract the bewildering misrepresentation of China they read and hear from Western sources. Regretfully, the meetings were often constrained by time, but not before agreement was always reached that this was just the beginning of the partnership. One such example of this haste was when we visited the Center of China and Globalization, which is China's leading non-governmental think tank, headquartered in Beijing. After a brief tour of the office, it felt like we had only just begun our dialogue when our tight itinerary dictated that the meeting had ended. The discussion continued with our CCG friends as they escorted us down to our bus. One of my delegation comrades commented that I appeared to be engaged in a heated discussion with a member of CCG. I said, no, it was good. We were both speaking rapidly. And when he informed me that China had some issues with human rights, I replied, no doubt, before adding that China must not be held to a different standard of accountability that the West fails to uphold itself. A recipe for unequal partnership. We departed on good terms. Fundamental to our visit was our red education. Throughout the 5 cities we visited, the red gene that flows through the lifeblood of everything that China is trying to do is on display. For instance, in the glorious lobby of the CPC Academy in Changchun, there's the incredible statue of Marx and Engels, whilst Marx and Li Dezhou greet people in the gardens of Zhejiang Red Boat Leadership Academy. Then there's the giant statue of Mao Zedong outside the Changchun Film Studio. Equally, the hammer and sickle is everywhere, from the stunning ceiling of the Revolutionary Memorial Hall in Jiaxing to the field behind the agricultural center we visited outside Siping, all of which were incredibly stimulating. The battle for symbols is an important arena on the journey of any country's rejuvenation, known only too well by those of us from former colonies who have spent a lifetime walking past statues and symbols of our colonial oppression. American writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin famously wrote, "It took many years of vomiting up all the filth I'd been taught about myself and half believed before I was able to walk on this earth as though I had a right to be here." Arguably, the most important aspect of our red education in China was to absorb and bear witness to the theoretical foundation of Marxism, which floats in the air as a caressing guide with Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, the current ideological banner of the country. It is vitally important for anyone wishing to understand contemporary China that we attempt to claw ourselves out of the ideological pit of ignorance whence we bathe in untruths, which are then nonchalantly echoed as informed opinion on Xi Jinping and China in general. Centuries of constructed racism, which we Irish understand only too well, against China from the West, with the alleged threat of the yellow peril lurking in the shadows ready to pounce on our freedoms, distorts reality in the standing in which President Xi is held both in China and the non-Western world. This is in part due to China's promotion of peace, diplomacy and development based on mutual benefit through the Belt and Road Initiative launched by President Xi in 2013. It was in Zhejiang that I began to comprehend a little more the theory and practice that is distinctive to China's successful development. When observing how ordinary people interact with one another, as well as talking to our Chinese comrades, you begin to capture a flavour of the collective consciousness that drives China forward. This is not the austere or robotic effect that Western liberals would have you believe, but a progressively energetic instinct that conjures up Mao Zedong's theoretical concept of the mass line, where all citizens are true stakeholders in society, confident that their well-being is best served by the structure of China's political system. This was encapsulated in Zhejiang urban planning exhibition hall, where citizens can see in 3D splendor, digital splendor, that what the next stage of development will be, juxtaposed to the stage of development they have come from. If Britain had a similar exhibition hall, they would be showing urban destruction yesterday, more today, and lots planned for the future. The first structural example we were shown of Zhejiang's people-centered development was the Lilu Future Community in Zhejiang. This was a housing initiative encompassing Xi Jinping's vision of balancing the present with the future, with the focus on affordability and well-being. The well-being theme continued when we visited the Party Mass Service Centre in Zhejiang. This huge listening building is, amongst other things, a mental health base with a psychological wellness centre where you can see a therapist within 24 hours of booking. Whilst driving from Zhejiang to Hangzhou, at different times you're hit by the young vegetation everywhere. The motorway has beautifully pristine hedges that separate the lanes, which then become flowers as you get closer to the cities as the speed of traffic reduces. The immaculate maintenance of all green areas around the cities is testament to the ecological consciousness that Xi Jinping set about instilling in around 2004 while party secretary in the province. The environmental problems that China has had in the past are well known, which the West has exploited to its fullest in their unique hypocritical way. However, China is a country that learns quick and acts faster and is the leading nation in green development around the world. This is the application of crossing the river by feeling for stones associated with Xi Jinping. For China, investment in developing its ecological consciousness has manifold benefits, from creating jobs, developing areas like the Westlake and National Tea Museum for tourism, meeting global climate obligations, and also creating a visually pleasing environment that generates a soothing atmosphere for all citizens, irrespective of income. When we visited the ancient water town of Zhejiang, which is described as a fictitious land of peace and happiness, I recall a conversation with Luning during our stroll around the picturesque setting regarding people of varying ages wearing traditional clothing. We both agreed it was delightful, and Luning told me it had become much more popular and affordable in recent years. During our conversation, we discussed the past of both our countries without saying we understood that embracing the past on our own terms is a way of shaking off the alienation implanted on us by indifferent outsiders. That evening, I sat with Hui Hui during our evening meal. Hui Hui is the third of our Chinese hosts who travelled with us throughout our visit and was a reassuring presence on our excursions, although always there if needed. I asked Hui Hui during dinner whether she was taught Marxism at school. She says, of course. She wrote it down. We learn about history of socialism from fantasy to theory, practice, productivity and ownership economy, materialist dialectics, historical materialism and other basic knowledge, and then combined with China's national conditions. I showed my comrade Francisco Hui Hui's message and he exclaimed, China really is nurturing a new kind of human being. Awestruck, we deliberated the endless possibilities of young people's creative development in an environment that encourages the study of reality and what wondrous possibilities it will mean for China, for us all. Jilin in the northeast China, which borders the People's Republic of Korea and Russia, was probably my favorite part of the trip. Of course, we already had 7 or 8 successful days behind us, built up a great camaraderie and absorbed so much positivity from our day-to-day exchanges. Perhaps I was just savouring every last moment in the knowledge the trip was coming to an end. Either way, Jilin, specifically Siping, a city with a population of around 1.8 million people, which was dusty, somewhat dated, with some daring, if slightly surrealistic architecture on the outskirts of the city, radiated energy and was wholesomely uplifting. For Siping reminded me of the northeastern Turkish city of Kars as described by Orhan Pamuk in his 2002 novel Snow. Pamuk's novel forlornly describes the political and cultural tension of East meeting West in an isolated part of Turkey close to the borders of the old Soviet republics of Georgia and Armenia. Unlike cars described then by the novelist, the people in Siping conveyed no such pessimism, with the atmosphere of the city portraying one beginning to emerge from paralysis. Before entering Siping, we stopped off for a wonderful lunch in what appeared to be a roadside cafe, where loaded trucks kicked up dirt in both directions, moving forward with purpose, disciplined, unwilling to deviate from the task of driving China forward, unaware of our delegation, keen to contribute to the rejuvenation of the country. As we left the restaurant, one of the delightful people who had helped serve us food had my dear comrade Francisco and I whirled like two Catherine wheels in excitement at the genuineness exuding from our host. "We hope you enjoy China. We want you to invest in our country," she said in broken phrases. I'm near finished. Next stop, Siping Memorial Hall, where we were greeted by a welcoming party at the entrance, including a formidable young man dressed in a Soviet-style coat who ushered us into the hall to begin our tour. The museum was a wondrous memorial to the heroic actions of the CPC, who fought 4 battles with the KMT during the War of Liberation in Siping, which made it become known as the City of Heroes. At the end of the guided tour, we descended on the gift shop like gluttons, ravenous for red memorabilia, enthused by the chronicle of the local revolutionary history just recounted. The staff, mindful of our schedule, hurried to keep us on track, at which point my delegation comrade Danny Haiphong started nudging me, saying, "Look at the police officer helping out in the gift shop. There's no way that would happen in the States." With dusk approaching, we left the Memorial Hall to walk onto the expansive Hero Square, appropriate in its vastness to enable peaceful reflection upon leaving the War Museum. As we started to take pictures and wander, we noticed little groups of people singing traditional Chinese songs. Upon our approach, they nodded in appreciation and dedicated a few songs in our direction. In response, we applauded in gratitude. It was such a beautifully serene experience that at once I wished to share it with all the people that I love, with everyone. There's something about the collective consciousness we experienced in China that could evoke a hope long since vanquished in large swathes of the Western working class. No longer should we throw our hands despairingly in the air and wallow in the doldrums of Ginsburg or the desolation of Kerouac. No, China is more like the land of Audre Lorde, where the future has no need to be put on hold, waiting for a new Messiah, and change is the immediate responsibility of each of us, wherever and however we stand. The Friends of Socialist China 2024 delegation to the People's Republic of China has borne witness to an inspiring alternative that truly puts the well-being of all its population first. To our own misfortune, may the working class choose to ignore or not fight for such a path with the age of multipolarity upon us. My own task now is to take President Xi's advice and to pursue depth. I may have visited the PRC, but I have a long way to go before I can say that I've reached China. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Russell. Once again, extremely moving and highly informative, and brought back some really wonderful memories. Yeah, interesting what you were saying about the exchanges with the academics and officials that we had in Jilin University, in Renmin University, in the party schools in Hangzhou, in Jiaxing and Siping. It just struck me that it was quite amazing how wide-ranging those discussions were, with no shortage of disagreement, no shortage of robust debates. Like there's this caricature of Chinese Marxism that it's sort of very formulaic and that it's somehow lacking in creativity, and that CPC members and CPC officials are sort of basically robots. Actually, I think the other delegates would agree that the people we interacted
Hello.
with were...
Maybe,
Radhika, we can hear you.
sorry.
It's the last person I was expecting to troll the meeting. Yeah, actually, I think the people we interacted with were extremely thoughtful, extremely intelligent, experienced, and creative Marxists. I mean, one difference I guess you do notice is that our Chinese comrades in general have a big focus on application of theory. It's very much not rooted in the sort of dogmatism, in the purism, in the sectarianism that more or less saturates leftist circles in the West. The theory is there to serve practice, and the practice is there to serve the people, to improve people's lives, and ultimately to move further continually towards the ultimate long-term goal of communism. Now, the last speaker is going to be Sage Stanescu, and Radhika, if you're able to make Sage a co-host of the meeting so that she's able to share her video as well, that would be great. We're going to have a bit of time left for discussion after the panel. So there's a couple of people on who are delegates who I would like to encourage to make a contribution if they would like to do so. I think Ali is still on the call. I think Harun is still on the call. I think Graham may still be on the call, although he's in Hanoi and might have had to leave because it's very late there. So if those comrades would like to contribute after Sage, then they'd be very welcome. Other than that, I think given that we've been subjected to a fairly concerted and systematic troll and sabotage campaign, I'm not going to ask people to actually show their videos and unmute and speak. I think that's inviting disaster at this point. So what I will ask is that if people have got questions and contributions, please put them in the chat, and I will go through the speakers in the order in which they spoke to respond to each other and to respond to the chat, like with just 3 to 4 minutes each. So with that out the way, I'd like to introduce Sage Stanescu. Sage is a young activist and academic and historian, and expert in cultural issues. She's based in Britain. She's of Romanian origin. She is one of our newest Friends of Socialist China Britain committee members, and this was her first time visiting China, and it was a source of great delight that she was able to join us. Sage, are you on the call and ready?
Hi, yes. Oh yeah, okay, my video is showing. Okay. Hi everyone. So, unfortunately I am sick, as you can hear, but I have written something for me to just read out, even if like the fever is getting to me. But yes, so for those who might not be familiar with me or my work, I have been deeply involved in supporting the now on hiatus Stop Asian Hate UK, founded by my partner Aidan, who some of you may already know. Together, we have organized impactful events, including a protest and an open mic night to support the East and Southeast Asian diaspora and combating anti-ESEA racism. Additionally, we have collaborated with Iris Yao at the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding, where we were working tirelessly to foster mutual respect and understanding between communities here in Britain, as well as ESEA communities here in Britain and China. So, in April 2024, I had the profound honor of visiting China as part of the Friends of Socialist China delegation, hosted by our esteemed guests from Chinese Association for International Understanding. As a heritage graduate and someone prospectively looking to start my PhD next year, I embarked on this journey with a willingness to learn about Chinese history and culture, as well as how this links in with China's current development. So, my initial impressions were a mixture of shock and awe at the incredible development I witnessed in China. Literally, as soon as we got out of the airport in Beijing. The rapid progress in China reminded me, the infrastructure reminded me of my home country, Romania, yet with a significantly more advanced infrastructure. The level of urban development and modernization was truly remarkable, especially when contrasted to the UK, where I've lived, unfortunately, for almost 10 years. Before my visit, I held certainly preconceived notions about China, particularly regarding its environmental conditions. There is a certain image of China portrayed in Western media as this like gray hellscape, but I was pleased to find out that the opposite was the case. So the regions we toured, Beijing, Zhejiang, and Jilin, were remarkably clean, green, and adorned with literal beautiful blossoms everywhere, like colors that I didn't even know flowers could be, in fact. I hadn't seen somewhere so beautiful. And I think this demonstrated the significant strides in environmental improvements in China. I would look on my phone and I would be expecting to see like a horrible score on the weather app on my iPhone, but it was not the case. So this development is recorded by Sustainable Mobility as the PM 2.5, which is called particulate matter. It's a type of pollution. The air pollution levels had decreased from 101.56 in 2013 to 31.74 in 2022. And I'll link this in the chat as well. And obviously, this is still not perfect. No one is saying it is, but it's an improvement. And the things that Western media likes to say about China are absolutely not true, at least in this regard. I can say that I've seen it, and it is absolutely a beautiful green place, and especially Zhejiang province. It was absolutely astounding. Moving on, during our stay, we had the privilege of delving into the rich history of the Chinese Revolution at Peking University in Beijing, the Nanhu Revolutionary Memorial Hall in Zhejiang, as well as learning about the response to Japanese imperialism in Siping, Jilin province. So, the insights gained there highlighted the remarkable journey China has undergone in terms of development and modernization since the 1949 revolution, led by Chairman Mao Zedong. Learning about these historical milestones provided a profound context to the country's current achievements. There, we explored the profound impact of the new culture movement, which I was particularly interested in, led by the young Mao Zedong and his fellow student activists. And you can actually see at Peking University the museum that they've got, and they've kept all of these records of even like the banners that were used by some of the students in their activism. It was profoundly interesting and impressive how much they've actually preserved. This movement was pivotal in transforming Chinese society by promoting new ideas in literature, philosophy, education, arts, calligraphy, anything you can imagine. And it ultimately laid the groundwork for modern China's development. An essential aspect of this movement was making Chinese culture accessible to the masses. So, for example, one thing was simplifying the Chinese alphabet, thus promoting literacy, something that in nearby provinces like in Hong Kong and in Taiwan as well, they still maintain the traditional script of Chinese characters as opposed to the simplified one, which is considerably easier to read by most people who haven't studied it formally. And people who would have studied it would have been scholars who had the means and the money to do so before the revolution. Right, where am I? Yeah, and I think this movement kind of enabled a broader segment of society to engage with and appreciate this cultural heritage, and it fostered a sense of national identity and unity. We also learned much about how art and filmmaking was used throughout revolutionary Chinese history, for example, at Changchun Film Studio, and how the studio contributed significantly to shaping early Chinese cinematic narratives and themes during the revolutionary period, often depicting heroic struggles against oppression and imperialism, much notably Japan and Japanese imperialism. I think very importantly, as a heritage graduate, I was particularly eager to learn more about Chinese cultural heritage and traditional Chinese culture. Because obviously I've looked at it, I've researched it for so long, but to actually see it in front of me was really a life-changing moment. And it was with great excitement that we then entered the National Tea Museum in Zhejiang. This visit was not only enlightening, but also a testament to China's commitment to preserving its cultural heritage whilst embracing modernity. I'll get to that in a second. So we participated in some traditional ceremonies and got to try Zhejiang specialty tea, a very fresh tasting Longjing tea. there were myriad types of teas on display. Like honestly, I think it was in the thousands. They had these sort of like little rhombuses where they had like little bits of tea on display, and they separated it by type of tea, which is super interesting. Which is also interesting because lots of people actually associate green teas, matcha, things like that with Japan, but we all know it originated in China, and it's super interesting to see that 1,000-year-old tradition being kept alive and on display for people to learn about. So there was such a cool thing talking about the modern aspect of it, especially in museums. You could actually click this button and it would disperse the fragrance of the particular tea, the button that you're clicking on, and you could just put your nose up to it. It was literally so cool. It was really, really strong. I don't know how they do it. It's really impressive though. We also engaged in numerous discussions with scholars and experts from Peking University, Renmin University, Jilin University. The discourse at Jilin University was particularly fascinating, offering deep insights into the economic landscape as well as the agricultural advancements of Jilin province. We had actually also toured some of the fields as well, and I think it was the Lishu Black Soil Museum as well that we saw, where they were talking about the fertility of the soil and how much grain in China actually comes from the Jilin province. And yeah, and we discussed the development plans as well as future aspirations of the province and China in general. And I'm almost finished, but before I move on to my final point, I must emphasize the warmth and hospitality of the Chinese people, despite the language barrier, which sometimes it was quite a large barrier. Metro and museum staff, knowledgeable museum interpreters, tour guides, our gracious hosts, they all made us feel incredibly welcome. Despite some of them not speaking English, they still tried to make us feel welcome in their country. And it was a lovely time when we went to one of the ancient cities. I can't quite remember what it was called now. We went to one ancient city, and there was a little cafe, and there was this lady who was just doing all the coffees herself, and it was honestly one of the best coffees I've ever had in my life. Like Starbucks can't compare to something like that, honestly. And it was like right across from a Starbucks, so that was also quite funny. But after that, our interpreter basically said she's giving you these little postcards, just to say, enjoy China, have a lovely time in China. And we're like, oh my God, this is so cute. Loved it. Really, really loving, caring people. And honestly, their openness and eagerness to show their culture, to share the culture with us, was really motivating for us as well. And yeah, very heartwarming. But since this is also a report back, I must also mention that whilst my experience in China was truly wonderful and filled with awe-inspiring moments and cultural discoveries, one aspect that stood out was the need to emphasize foreign tourism more effectively, especially as I'm a heritage management major. I think this is really crucial for me to say that despite the warmth and hospitality of the Chinese people, there are often frequent language barriers that hindered communication and understanding. And whilst the technological advancements in the museums were truly, truly remarkable, much of the museum interpretation, and here in heritage terms, we're talking about written text that accompanies something like an object or an artifact, not spoken verbal interpretation that's someone like a tour guide. So it doesn't mean that, it means the written one. So that was mainly available in Chinese. And I think for China to attract more foreign tourists and ensure they have enriching experiences, like this was the whole point of our delegation, to go there and see for ourselves and experience China and experience everything that they had to show us, and things that maybe that they didn't specifically show us, but things that we noticed. So that's something that I noticed. And which I think would be way more helpful in future. And I think it would facilitate deeper cultural exchanges and also contribute significantly to promoting China's rich heritage on a global scale. I think this is really important for us to talk about, and how this is just an observation to, perhaps like as a form of feedback for them to take into account if we want you know, everyone to actually see the true China. And in conclusion, my visit to China, you know, as Carlos was saying, this is my first time seeing China, was a transformative experience, and it challenged my perceptions, broadened my understanding of the country's progress, and I'm very excited to share these insights with you today, and I look forward to an engaging discussion. And thank you for your attention. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sage. Yeah, that definitely resonated with me seeing Beijing and Siping and Changchun and other places, and Hangzhou especially, so clean and green, and to witness some of the ecological improvements that have taken place in China. You know, there's really been a complete transformation over the last 10 to 15 years in particular. You know, like not so long ago, the list of the top 20 most polluted cities in the planet was dominated by China. And actually, these days, there's not a single Chinese city on that list. You know, China had a reputation as being a major polluter and a major contributor to climate change, a major emitter of greenhouse gases. And of course, its development has been fueled to a pretty significant degree by vast quantities of coal that are easily and cheaply accessible. But now China's been addressing the problem in a really serious way. Last year, for example, China installed more renewable energy capacity than the whole rest of the world put together, and more than the US has in total. You know, China has a systematic plan to cut out fossil fuels and to move to green energy, and it's devoting huge resources to that. And the fact that it's China that's taken the lead on this, the fact that it's China that's now the only green energy superpower and is ahead in that game by a very, very long way, says something quite interesting and quite important about the socialist system, about what can happen when you have planning at the core of your economic system, about what can happen when you don't have a capitalist class as the ruling class, as the group of people who are calling the shots in terms of economics and politics and social policy. So we've had the panel contributions. I've said that we'll take contributions from delegates, people who are on the delegation that weren't on the panel. Harun tells me he's bedridden. Very sorry to hear that, Harun. Graham is in Hanoi and I believe has gone to bed because it's long past his bedtime. I don't believe Rashida and Francisco are on the call. So that leaves Ali Al-Assam. Ali, would you like to say something? Let's see.
Hello.
Hi, Ali.
Hello. Sorry, my video is not enabled, but you know, I mean,
Ali, you can now
really
enable it. Sorry, I've just allowed you to enable your video, so please go ahead and do so if you want.
Oh, start video. It's still, I mean, I could speak without video. What I would say, I mean, I would like to thank all my colleagues for the fantastic contribution on their experience of visiting the socialist China. It has been a tremendous experience for me, and I learned so much from it. And you know, I come originally from Iraq as well as living in the UK. And I make sure that my colleagues in Iraq learn as much as they can from the visit. And we are continuing with this process. Really, as everybody have said, it's a fantastic encouragement to us to know that you know, more than 1 billion of the population have risen to liberation and good living standards, and that's a source of encouragement for all people fighting imperialism and colonialism, plus the scientific approach of the Communist Party of China has been an inspiration to us. And there's so much to learn from the scientific approach and their approach both to liberation and to building socialism. And we continue to learn from it. So it is really a bright star in a world full of aggression and the wars, like what's happening in Gaza now. And we'll continue to work together to make sure that this experience is successful elsewhere. This is our duty, whether we are in Britain, Iraq, or elsewhere. And thank you. That's all that I could say now.
That's great. Thanks so much for that contribution, Ali. So there have been a few comments and questions in the chat. And as I said, we'll go through the panelists one by one in the order that they spoke. And just if everyone can try and restrict themselves to sort of 3, 4, 5 minutes, then that would be absolutely excellent. Fiona, are you able to come in?
Sorry, I'm just going to check whether she can. Okay, I'm going to ask her to unmute. Pardon me. But Carlos, I think you can also ask people to unmute as you choose them. But just check and let me know.
Yeah. Fiona, are you around? Failing that.
She has headset problems, she says. She says, can you go to someone else while she fixes that?
Oh, okay. Cool. Roger, can we go to you first then?
Oh, once again,
Yeah.
I'm going to have Roger. Are you? Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, Roger is already co-host, so very good.
Right. So, which one of the which question do you want me to deal with?
Well, I think as first contributor, you can take your pick, but also if there's anything, if you wanted to come back in on anything that any of the other panelists said, then go ahead. Failing that,
I mean,
you have the floor for a couple
the other
of minutes.
panelists were, I mean, just a wonderful painted picture of what was, as Sage was saying, a real life-changing experience out there, and I think that was really important. There was one question there's one question and then a comment that I want to make. Actually, there's one of the questions that was raised on there was that I saw on the chat that I can't quite find now, was about Taiwan and whether or not one of the ways of dealing with the issue of Taiwan would be to have a referendum. I think no is the short answer, because why would you have a referendum on something that already is part of the country? It's not, Taiwan is part of China. There's a whole kind of industry being built up by the United States, I think, to create this atmosphere that China wants to go to war with, wants to invade its own bloody region of Taiwan. It's ridiculous. The United States needs to calm down and get the hell out of interfering in other people's domestic issues, actually. And that, for me, is the answer to that. The people of China will decide what's best for China. The other quick issue actually was about the kind of left attitude towards China, and we've seen this before. There's a comrade Stephen Sefton's on here from Nicaragua I saw, and one of the things that I said when I visited Nicaragua last year was one of the things that I saw the most was how people who'd never been to the country but seem to have a view about what was best for that country. Let's leave it for the people who are on the ground in China and in Nicaragua and Cuba and everywhere else that these armchair socialists seem to think that that they know better about. Let's leave it for the people on the ground to decide on their own revolution, on how to build their own revolution. You can have a comment, you can have a view about it, of course, right? Nothing wrong with that. But let's quit this telling people what to do. The comment that I wanted to make, Carlos, there is about I saw somebody earlier on made a point that we shouldn't concentrate on what these trolls were saying and we should look forward. And that's right. And we should do that. But let's be really clear. There was a whole bunch of racism that was brought into this meeting. We should never, ever ignore that. Ever. Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you very much, comrade. 100% agreed with that. Fiona, are your headset problems resolved?
I believe so, if you can hear me.
Yeah, got it.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I'll address the question I think Yuri's put in the chat. Can you talk about how leftists who support the pivot to Asia and recycle anti-China nonsense, what they think the pivot to Asia?
I can't hear you well, Fiona.
Oh, okay. Is that any better?
A little.
Yeah, this headset is breaking. I'll try and speak a bit louder. So this from Yuri. Can you talk about how leftists who support the pivot to Asia and recycle anti-China nonsense whilst they think the pivot to Asia and NATO isn't necessarily evil because China is a rival capitalist superpower, etc., and how, yeah, basically, I guess addressing leftists who don't support China or see that NATO isn't necessarily evil, so feel that China is correctly the enemy. I think, I don't know, I feel like with a lot of these questions when it comes to leftists and the support of China, no matter what leftists believe, especially if they're imperial core, the fact of the matter is that China, to be quite honest, doesn't care. China is doing what it is doing, and China is improving the lives of hundreds of millions of people, lifting literally hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It's that saying, right? It's the proof is in the pudding. So whilst it's very easy to be sitting in the seat of the imperial core and armchair sort of analyzing how a country should or shouldn't be doing things, it's just as Roger said, it should be the people on the ground, the people living that reality who can speak to the success or the failure of their country or of their governance. So I strongly feel that, you know, as leftist, socialist, communists, whoever, especially in the imperial core, our only job is to, not our only job, but one of our main jobs is to defeat imperialism, is to challenge imperialism and colonialism wherever it rears its head. And part of that is rebuking a lot of the disinformation about China and learning how to be media, learning how to use our media literacy skills, though it seems to be very lacking, to challenge a lot of the narratives that the BBC puts out. And, you know, whilst it's all very funny that they keep on putting stuff out about China spying through balloons or teapots or pigeons or whatever the latest thing is, it is actually quite insidious because it's not just about the news story, it's about how it ingrains a state of yellow peril into the public consciousness. And Red Scare obviously comes hand in hand with that. And I think, you know, what China is doing and what people need to learn about what China is doing is that it isn't this stereotypical sort of like quote unquote brainwash society, a term created by the CIA, by the way, in which everyone just bows down to one leader and they don't have their single opinion or thought. As many of our comrades have said, you know, there is a wide diversity of thought and belief and political feeling across the whole of China, even within the governing party, CPC, but there is a whole people's democracy. No matter how you look at it, you can see how democracy is conceptualized in a different way in China, and it isn't the two-party system that we're used to seeing in the UK, first past the post. We vote for someone who's pretty awful or someone who's kind of less awful, but still really bad, as we're seeing in these upcoming elections. And that is the antithesis to what Chinese people believe that democracy should, well, the overwhelming amount of Chinese people think that democracy should be, which is that everyone should be working together to build consensus, to build a better country, to build a better world for all the people. And it's not about rival parties. And China has about, I believe, 17 different parties within its structure, but remains, quote unquote, a one-party state. But again, it's all about consensus building. It doesn't matter which party you're part of. And this emphasized quite heavily. It is about how we can all work together, how millions of people within the party can work together to improve the lives of over a billion people. And I think learning about Chinese democracy and how it works on a grassroots level all the way up to the Central Committee, that is a really, really important part of any leftist duty, to be able to unravel the quote unquote mystery that is China and Chinese democracy that we're always told doesn't exist. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Fiona. Margaret, would you like to come in for a few minutes?
Excuse me. Thank you, Carlos. I don't have a lot to add to what others have said about the delegation. I want to thank you all. You brought back all these memories. The trip was a bit of a whirlwind, so sometimes it seems like a dream. It's like, did I really go there? But I want to say, in general, something very basic. Nations have a right to sovereignty. They have a right to self-determination. And it doesn't matter if some, armchair opinion giver or anywhere else, what they think about China. What they have to say, regardless of what they think about China, is that the US doesn't have a right to interfere with that nation. That's the most important thing to point out. And as Roger said, we have to confront these people, these bullies, who think they can silence us, who want us to shut up. But we also have to confront these people, the liberals, in short, I think that's the good word, right? To confront liberalism, which would have us, if you're not careful, which would have you join with the imperialists in attacking China and attacking other countries that are striving to have self-determination and determine what they want. So that is my message to everyone. And the propaganda is so insidious. When I think about the things that we're told about China by our government, by corporate media, it's impossible to think it's a functioning society, that there's anything good about it. And so I hope that people remain aware of that. And if we understand, well, I want to say something. There's a drive now in the US to, in effect, bring back the military draft, which ended around the time of the Vietnam War. There was a selective service in place. Young men were supposed to register when they turned 18. Of course, they're not bothering to register. Now there's a push in Congress to make it automatic, to sign up young men, and one proposal of young women too, for a draft. Why do you need that? There are people here who actually think. One of the things I find so frightening, they really think they can defeat China militarily or economically. This, fantasy, very dangerous fantasies, and we have to be very, very careful. And I think if we stick to the principle of non-interference with other nations and speaking about that very openly, that's going to be very important, because we have leaders in the collective West who actually believe, that's the dangerous thing, they believe they can defeat China or pull Taiwan away or have a war or, who knows what else. So the principle of self-determination has to be kept in mind, regardless of our opinions about China or any other nation in the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Margaret. Russell, are you still there, and are you willing to come in for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, Carlos, I'm still here. Yeah, thanks. I mean, a quick point on Tom Manger's point about how does he grow the organization in the States. Well, I mean, as a trade unionist, you would say, well, Tom, you do it. You know, as soon as this called in, you know, you make connection with whoever's on this committee, you know, and he starts organizing where he is. I mean, that's how we do in trade union movement. We have to sort of do the legwork or the donkey work, as it's called, and do the painstaking, just try to grow the movement. Anyone can do it. We all get involved, and we try to create a wider circle of people, irrespective of their background. So yeah, I mean, I think Tom can jump into that himself. But obviously, the point that Yuri has made about challenging the left, which Fiona and Margaret and Roger have stated, we've all had to do that. We have to do it in our day-to-day lives. When I have been sort of formulating my understanding of China over the last couple of years, particularly when we were going on the delegation, I had leftists, comrades who I work with, trade unions, saying to me, but it's a police state. And I'm having to remind them that actually I grew up in Belfast, where we did have army barricades, where I was stopped in cars with my parents, where peers of mine were shot in the back by British soldiers, and then the political establishment then come out and supported them. And they forget that, but that's what happens when you come from Belfast and you live in London. The people want to talk about, leftists want to talk about injustice. They'll bring up Orgrave, they'll bring up Hillsborough, but it pains them to bring up Derry. It pains them to bring up Bloody Sunday. It pains them to bring up Ballymurphy, because they don't like the fact of the matter is that we resisted colonialism, and they don't want to put their own well-being and material well-being on the line of putting that out in the open. So I think moving beyond that is that we have to keep drawing attention to the contradictions. That said, we basically keep drawing attention to the contradictions that people are talking about. How do we make connections with working people when they're making these derogatory terms about opinions about China? We challenge them straight away and say, how can you say this? How does your life materially benefit by getting involved with this propaganda and slander? And I've already noticed, because I like to look at the whites of people's eyes when they say this, and they don't have an answer. So I think that's what we can do, is we continue to challenge people right in the middle of where their cohorts are, look them in the whites of the eyes and say, well, you need to back that with evidence instead of slander. One of many things that's on my mind, but thank you all for the contributions. Cheers.
That's great. Thanks very much, Russ. And Sage, you get the last word from the panel.
Hi. Okay, no pressure or anything. Yeah, so I think I lost the question. What was it? So I think I had already kind of mentioned, what was I saying? 1 second, I'm trying to find my initial. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of like supporting liberalism and stuff, oh gosh. So I think so I think it's quite overdue now, indeed, that we should stop supporting neoliberal politics. They lead nowhere. Yeah, so I think I was already kind of saying in the chat, but just in case people missed it, I was having a disagreement at one point with someone, and she had told me that she supports Navalny, despite the fact that he's a Nazi. And I'd already told her he actually is a Nazi, and she's like, no, it's just what he symbolizes. And I think we just need to like move away from that. Because liberals will always say things like, oh, it's not perfect, is it? But it's about what it actually symbolizes, and we can change things from inside, and we can change things from within if we just vote for this party or vote for this party. We can help to change it from within, or lesser evil type of politics and things like that. So I think it's it's quite interesting, and I had said this before in the chat, but the whole thing about Chinese officials being seen as like automatons when they couldn't be anything further from that. And actually, I was truly, I don't know like how to describe this, and for it to come off as like this is not a script, this is actually what I'm saying for anyone who thinks otherwise. But genuinely, we had the most genuine reactions from people. Like we were in meetings and there would be people like listening to the interpreter and turning around and being like, haha, yeah, exactly, you know, and speaking to other people. And just, I don't know, just speaking to us like we are humans, have like, you know, making jokes sometimes, being normal people. There was lots of people that we met at the party schools and things like that who were just so eager to share everything with us and to find out what we think and to just see that they also have like their own passions about things, their own interests. There's like they have specific interests, to see that they do have passion about learning about Marxism and implementing, most importantly, Marxism in China. And I think it was honestly such a relief because I went in and I was like, oh my God, they're all going to be quite like stern and strict. And I'm like kind of, you know, scared about what might happen and stuff like that. But no, they were all really lovely people. And in fact, I had mentioned on the chat that I did meet Keir Starmer when I was doing my A-level. When I was doing A-level politics, he came to my college. And I did ask him a few questions and he just dodged and dodged and dodged, and all of his answers were just almost robotic, like how he just produced these answers that were literally just like almost preformed. I don't know, like there was people who were trying to force him on answering a clear answer and he just wouldn't do it. And that was the opposite of what I experienced when we went to China and when we actually did meet officials. They were very, very different. And I think just understanding how Marxist politics just change people and they focus on what is actually at hand rather than providing like halfway answers and sneaking around and things like that, as they do in neoliberal politics in the West. Could never get a clear answer out of people like Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson, or well, he might tell you to fuck off or something, but that's as direct as he will get. But that's yeah, I think lovely tone to end it on. Anyway, yes, so yeah, we are definitely overdue, I think. And we should be looking more at what China is doing rather than what AOC or I don't know who is doing. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sage. Characteristically very interesting and insightful. Radhika, just before I close up, I think you wanted to say a couple of words about the IMG.
Yes, thank you, Carlos, very much. First of all, before I say anything about the IMG, I just want to explain that sorry about the disruptions that we had earlier. It's been like, I would say Paul will remember at least 3 years since we've had any disruptors. So I had to remind myself of what I had to do, and Paul helped me a lot. And I think so did Carlos. So thank you very much. And thank you also for other suggestions. So we were able to keep them out. I think I said in the chat that I think at one point I was just desperately removing everybody because they seemed to me, most of them seemed to be like trolls. So I was removing them from the waiting room. So if any of your friends got left out, please give them my personal apologies and an explanation. Okay, very briefly then about the International Manifesto Group, which is the co-sponsor of this wonderful program, which has been so interesting, so insightful. I think listening to people going to China and contrasting what is going on there versus what's going on in the imperialist countries is always an absolute delight. And I think also an absolute reaffirmation of what is going on. I think this is the kind of thing that we need to spread. And so I thank Keith, Carlos, and all the people who went and reported today, and also those who did not report today for doing this. The International Manifesto Group, you will find us at www.internationalmanifesto.org. We were a discussion group which started in 2020, just when the pandemic started, just to try to understand what was happening around the world. We publish a couple of webinars every month, sorry, not every week. That would be impossible. So please watch out for us. Please subscribe to our channel at www.internationalmanifesto.org. You will be able to read our manifesto. Please consider signing it. Please consider volunteering. Please consider donating. Please consider joining us in a variety of different ways. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Radhika. So we're at time. We've reached the couple of hours mark. It's been a marathon, but a very enjoyable one, very inspiring and fascinating event. And thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with it in spite of some of the early difficulties. And it just struck me that it's so important to have delegations of this nature. It's so important to build people-to-people links and build understanding and solidarity between China and the West. You know, we're in a quite dangerous period of history, actually, where the US is pursuing a project of hegemony. It's pursuing a project for a new American century. It's not a viable project, and you know, their economy is in decline, their influence is in decline, but they're responding to that decline not with ideas about how to adapt to a new multipolar world, or how to engage with the rest of the world as an equal, or how to cooperate towards a brighter future, but rather how can they use their military supremacy to sabotage China's rise, to sabotage the project of sovereign development throughout Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. So the more we can do to build understanding of China, to develop solidarity with China, to promote the maximum unity of the progressive forces in the West with the socialist countries, with the countries of the global South, with the anti-imperialist and the national liberation movements, the better. So these events are very important. These delegations are very important, and we'll certainly seek to organize many more. So thank you so much to everyone who contributed today. Thank you to everyone who attended. Radhika has mentioned the International Manifesto groups, the ways of contacting and keeping up to date. You can also visit the Friends of Socialist China website, socialistchina.org, sign up for our weekly newsletter. And we in Friends of Socialist China, we in the International Manifesto group, look forward to working together with you further. And we very much hope to see you again next time. Thank you.
Peace.